Oh, to the right of mute.
Okay, folks, let's get started. And you know how we start the meeting. Good evening, Democrats.
Buenas tardes, demócratas.
I heard some of the people, some people were distracted. I don't know how many people on Zoom did it. So let's get everyone to unmute on Zoom, everybody to unmute in person, and let's try it again. Good evening, Democrats.
Good
evening,
Democrats.
Okay, welcome to our July membership meeting. I'm John Katz, the president of the Santa Monica Democratic Club. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, in here, out there. This is our third hybrid meeting with both in-person and online attendees. And you can see on the screen here, all of our folks are on Zoom. For those who are on Zoom, you can see all the people who are here in person. There's also another camera if you want to just click around and see the full screen of the room. There's another angle with that. We want to, for those who are on Zoom, if you would like Spanish interpretation, our interpreter Suzanne is here.
Hola, buenas tardes. Para los que quieren escuchar en español, simplemente hagan clic cuando John activa esta capacidad y van a escuchar en español simultáneamente. Gracias.
Thank you.
Okay, and we'll get that turned on right now.
I put a note in the chat too for that.
Great. Okay, so that started. We're also proud this evening to be partnering in this meeting with our friends at the West Side Young Democrats. I want to recognize from their board a few people who are here this evening: the president, Rachel Bracker, the political director, Alec White, events director, Ariel Pepper, and treasurer Rutik Shinglot. And policy director Rebecca is on the Zoom. Okay, so I believe that Rachel has a few announcements from the West Side Young Dems before we start with our guest. Rachel, come on up.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. We're really excited to partner with you guys. So I want to keep the announcements really quick. We have our Westy Awards on August 2nd. It's a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. in West Hollywood at State Social. At midnight tonight, the prices go up for tickets. So if you're interested in coming, and it's, you know, young and young at heart Dems, welcome. We're really excited about our program and having a lot of really cool people there from across the West Side. So please purchase your tickets. It's all over our social media, and then also there's a bit.ly link if you put in the -Westies, all lowercase. And then also just to announce, our next meeting is going to also be the third Wednesday of the month at 7 p.m. We always do that, and that'll be on Zoom. So anyway, I like to keep them quick. John, if you want to keep it going, but thank you guys for partnering with us. It's always exciting to partner with other clubs around.
Thank you so much. Okay, so tonight we have two elected officials joining us for a double header Q&A event. We asked all of our members to submit questions in advance, and we've done our best to assemble all of the best questions here. Our first guest, County Supervisor Lindsey Horvath, will be joining us for the first time since her election last fall. So we have a lot to ask about. And our second guest will be coming in about an hour, Assemblymember Rick Chavez Zbur. Already joined us once earlier this year. So we're looking forward to an update from him on, now that he's been in Sacramento for 6 months, how things are going there. And finally, after we hear from both of our guests, we'll take up 5 more state bills for endorsement consideration from our legislative committee. So to introduce our first guest, let's welcome Santa Monica City Council member Carolyn Terosas. And as you may know, Carolyn not only serves our city, but also works in her day job for County Supervisor Holly Mitchell. And I just wanted to take a moment to say, having watched every single one of our city council meetings for the last few years, I want to personally thank Councilmember Torosis for her diligent work on the council, asking incisive questions of staff, working with her colleagues, even when it gets a little bit contentious, which surprisingly happens every now and then, taking the heat from the public when they have heated rhetoric. And all of that leads to better decisions and outcomes from this city council. And I know I, along with so many of our members, worked really hard to get you elected, Carolyn, and we're so grateful for the leadership that you've demonstrated on city council, and we're lucky to have you representing us. So please welcome Council Member Carolyn Torosis.
Thank you, John. That was way too kind. And we're very honored to have Supervisor Horvath here. I just wanted to give a little brief bio for all of you who don't know her. Supervisor Lindsey P. Horvath was elected to the LA County Board of Supervisors in November 2022. I hope you all know that. After serving as a city council member and the longest consecutively serving mayor for the city of West Hollywood. She is the youngest woman, the first millennial, and the only renter on the Board of Supervisors. We're very grateful. Her career has really been defined by tackling the hardest problems, building diverse coalitions, and delivering results for our community. Supervisor Horvath is widely known for her leadership on women's issues and served as the global coordinator for 1 Billion Rising, a global campaign of the V-Day movement to end violence against women and girls. She was the founding president of the Hollywood chapter of the National Organization for Women and previously served as the president of the National Women's Political Caucus for the LA West Side. She is also a champion for LGBTQIA+ rights, having served as a board member of the Victory Fund and a founding board member of the No Hate campaign. She has also advocated for LGBTQ+ older adults through her work on the Board of Services and Advocacy for GLBT Elders. It's called SAGE. And I believe that it was her that got us to fly all of the pride flags over every single county building for the first time ever. Sorry, I should say pride progress flags. On the county board, Supervisor Horvath has led on county governance reform to increase transparency and public participation in our county decision-making processes. Very important. She has been a champion for renter protections, and she has led at the Metro Board on developing a more equitable transportation infrastructure. She resides in West Hollywood with her dog Winston. And I would just like to say on a personal note, she has hired amazing and excellent staff that I get to work with every day. So I'm very grateful for that. Supervisor Horvath, please take it away.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say thank you, because I wouldn't be able to talk to you about all of the work that I've been doing over these past several months without your help and support. And so I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you did to help us get there. More importantly, all the work that you do to make Santa Monica and the 3rd District such a wonderful place to be. I'm incredibly honored to be here also because I know the record and legacy of activism and leadership many of you individually have demonstrated, as well as your leadership as a Democratic Club. So I know I'm in amazing company, and I thank the council member for her kind introduction. Her leadership is especially poignant to me because she works at the county. So if we weren't doing a good job, I would be on notice. So thank you very much, not only for your leadership here in the city, but for the hard work that you do at the county. We all benefit from it. I know Supervisor Mitchell directly benefits, but we all benefit from your hard work. Thank you very much. For those of you who didn't know, it was about 8 days between the time I found out from my opponent that he was conceding the election to the time that I actually was sworn into office. It was 8 business days, I think. So it was a bit of a whirlwind to ramp up and get into the office. In those 8 days, I had to close down my city council office. I had to close down my business and figure out what I was going to do in terms of having staff and being prepared to do the work. Gratefully, Supervisor Kuehl was well staffed by some very talented people many of whom stayed on to help us through the transition. Many of them had placements before we even came into the office, so it was generous of them to help us transition and make sure that we kind of knew what was what as we were coming into the work that we needed to do. We are still hiring for some of our positions, but we have built up an incredibly talented staff, and a couple of them are here tonight. Austin Sear and Nick Wyville is also here. You may know them. They may be familiar faces to you. But we are trying to bring all of the members of our staff out into different parts of the district, so you get to meet everyone. I know that many offices have field staff, and often you'll just see the field staff. We're trying to do things a little bit differently in that regard, so you know everyone who's on our team, and whomever you speak with will be able to connect you to the appropriate person in the office. So just to say that we're very excited to welcome you into the office and into the work that we're doing in the county. As I'm sure many of you know, the county has declared a state of emergency. It was the first motion I authored on the issue of homelessness. We did it not only to support the mayor of Los Angeles and her declaration, and of course the city of Santa Monica and your declaration, but because we have as a county a very broken system that needs restructuring. And my intention in authoring that motion, we are focusing on a few things, but my overall intention is to use this time of stated emergency to identify where we're getting in our own way on this issue, and to stand up a system of governance that makes much more sense, that's intelligible, not just for us in the building, but for everybody who needs to access it. So right now we're expediting hiring and contracting, but we're also working to look system-wide. And this issue of homelessness is something I know is very important here in Santa Monica, was important to me in my local service, of course, is important throughout the region. And it's why I appointed myself to the LAHSA Commission. I didn't think that we needed to have layers of bureaucracy between the decision makers and where those decisions are being made. And I believe next week I actually become chair of the commission, so I'll have even more of an opportunity to steer the direction that we're going in on this discussion. And trust me, as chair of LAHSA, I will come out here and make sure that the city of Santa Monica knows what we're doing and where the opportunities exist. I had the pleasure to meet with your city manager and your mayor to talk about issues of priority in the city of Santa Monica. And I have to tell you, you have incredible people leading this city, as you know. And so I'm really excited for the partnership that we have, that we're already engaging on the issues that matter most to the community. And I know we're going to get into questions, so I won't do a whole long drawn out intro, but I will say once again, thank you very much for the work that you're doing and for the opportunity to be of service in the district. I'll leave it to questions. I can touch on some other things along the way. And if we don't get to your question by the end, I'll tell you now, my email is my first name, Lindsey, Lindsey, at BOS, like Board of Supervisors, .lacounty.gov. So you can email us there and we'll make sure your questions get answered if we don't get to it here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, Lindsey. Supervisor Horvath. So let's just get right into it. I think many progressives understand the importance of the needle exchange program, authorized by state law and run by the county, which can be a lifesaver for many addicts and prevent people from transmitting AIDS and other diseases. However, recently here in Santa Monica, there's been a narrative that's been pushed by some conservative business owners who say that this program is making Santa Monica unsafe. So can you explain how the program works, why the exchanges happen at the specific sites that they do, and what you would say to those who feel the program is making Santa Monica or other communities unsafe to live in?
Sure. So I will start to tackle that question. I have some notes that I can get into a lot of specifics if I don't touch on exactly what you wanted to hear. So don't be afraid to ask a follow-up.
Okay.
So the needle exchange program is something that the county administers in locations throughout the county, not just in Santa Monica. In fact, when I was on the council in West Hollywood, we had a needle exchange program in West Hollywood. that was run in partnership with a community organization, much like it's done here in Santa Monica. And so it's important that harm reduction programs like this exist to ensure that people who are struggling with substance use disorder have the resources and access to services they need to get the help that they need. And so it's for all of the reasons that John said and more. And so we are working in partnership with a community-based organization here in Santa Monica. There is a place that people can actually go, but they also provide services through a van that goes out into locations in the community. From what I understand, currently it operates in Santa Monica 3 hours a week. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about this topic, and I want to make sure that we truly and thoroughly answer the question. But 3 hours a week is certainly not contributing to the broad scale issues that I think people are addressing or correlating with this actual service. The service does both. There's a brick and mortar and there's a van service that goes out into the community, because that's often how you're able to build trust. You can meet people where they are, let them know that the services that you're providing are safe and trusted, and you can bring them into the service once you establish that trust. So that's often how you're able to find success with programs like this. Obviously, we know that everyone who could benefit from such a program doesn't benefit the first time you interact with them. So sometimes it requires multiple communication, and that's why the van has to keep going out to try and engage folks to bring them into that service. We also do provide services that help people become sober. So for some people, harm reduction is important, and we want to make sure that we're helping to keep people as safe as possible. But we also think that getting people into recovery is important too. So we do both and in the county, because I've heard from people, well, why are you enabling people to stay using drugs? Why wouldn't you just help them get off drugs? But I think we're doing both. And it's important that we do both, because sometimes you have to bring people into that service to help them get to a different place to understand they need to do more to help themselves and protect their own health. So we're doing both, and we're using community-based organizations that have developed trust in the community, and we're using trusted, proven tactics to help get people off the benches and parks where you don't want them to be using drugs into the care of people who can actually help them a lot better than leaving them to suffer on their own. And so it's important to me that this program continue, but more importantly, it's important to the region that we are providing these services and making them affordable and accessible to people who need that help.
Great, thanks so much. Make sure this is there. Okay, so what are you and the Board of Supervisors doing to make good on the policy promise to close the Men's Central Jail and reduce the jail population and sustainable alternatives to incarceration?
So this is why I love Santa Monica Democratic Club, because like right out the gate, we're talking about needle exchange and shutting down the jail. Okay. So, but I got it. I understand the mission. I understand the assignment. I am on it. So we have been having this conversation for quite some time. In fact, the issue to close the jail, the issue to address the humanitarian crisis that's going on in our jails in LA County has been going on for an embarrassing number of years. And the most recent court order under which we are ordered to come into compliance was actually issued all the way back in 2015. So this has been going on for quite some time. In 2018, the board voted to actually shut down the jail, and yet here we are in 2023, and that still hasn't happened. So I want to be very clear. This is not something that I do because I find the topic is enjoyable or it's something I get great pleasure out of. I do it because it's not only something that we're being court ordered to do, but it is the right thing to do. It is the humanitarian thing to do. And it is essential that we do this work, not only for those moral reasons, but if we don't, we will not only lose control and authority over our facilities, we will also lose control and authority of the dollars that go to fund those services. We do not want the federal government coming in and taking over our facilities and our money. That's not what we want. We want to protect local control in these facilities. We want to make sure that we maintain and retain authority over them, and that we make sure that we are investing our resources, your dollars, into the services that you want to see in LA County. And so we are working, we have to work in collaboration with the Sheriff's Department, with the District Attorney's Office, and with the courts. So I know there was a whole campaign a few months back in the media that we weren't talking to law enforcement, that us reckless board members were just going into Men's Central Jail, opening up all the doors, letting people run out without consequence, not without consequence for them or without regard for community. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, even if you think we are the kind of people who would do such a thing, we don't have the authority to do so by ourselves. In fact, the Sheriff's Department, the District Attorney, and the courts have the ability to release people from jail, but which is why we have to work in partnership with them. So what we're doing is identifying the appropriate alternatives to incarceration. We know there's already been a county-wide effort to do that, and we are funding things like beds that are called P3, P4 beds. These are people who have the most acute of mental illnesses, who are not getting the services and help and rehabilitation they need inside the jail. We have already allocated funding in my time on the board. I voted in favor of that, to create beds that provide these treatment services so people can get out of jail cells where they're not getting help, they're not getting better, and get them into the treatment and care that they need in order to be rehabilitated. We also need to get people out of the jail who don't belong there in the first place. So half of the people in Men's Central Jail currently are people who are there on pretrial issues, which means they can't afford to pay their bail in many cases, and so they are not allowed out of the jail. So right now there's actually a court case ongoing. The courts just made an announcement yesterday about what they propose. Instead of, there was a no bail schedule instituted during the COVID emergency, that time of crisis that we all lived through. And so now the courts have said they have now come forward with a plan that's sort of modified from that schedule. Because we learned a lot of things during COVID, that some people can safely be released back into the community while they await their court date. We've also learned that there are crimes for which some people are not ready to be released. They pose a risk, and so the courts have done all kinds of assessments, and they have brought forward this week what their proposal is on something new. The county and the city were both sued by an entity, and we now have the, as well as Los Angeles Police Department and the Sheriff's Department. And so now we have to respond, say either we're going to stand with the courts and what they've recommended, offer work together, work in partnership to come up with different solutions. We could work separately and provide different solutions, I suppose, but right now we're the city and the county are on the theme of partnership, so that's where we're at. But we have to work on standing up a pretrial services system that actually makes sense. Do you know that if someone needs to go to court, they can't sign up for any sort of service to give them a text message to remind them that they have to go to court? So somebody who might have been cited, who is unhoused, is supposed to keep track of that piece of paper that they got, that citation that they got, and hope that we get them into court. That doesn't work. So there's a lot more infrastructure that we have to stand up so we get people out of jail who don't belong there. I also have a motion on Tuesday that outlines how we are directing, hopefully, the county to advocate to the courts, to the state, and to different entities who hold authority over our local operations, to say, we need your help. We need you to give us greater flexibility in some of these areas. And so there's an opportunity for you to advocate on Tuesday and to learn about what our process is going to be going forward, so we can get that even more authority that we need at the local level to do what we need to do to depopulate the jails. But we actually have to stand up the beds and the services that people need, and will hold people accountable, because of course we know that accountability is key, but accountability doesn't have to necessarily mean jail. In fact, in many cases, people are not getting rehabilitated in jail, they will end up worse off and potentially in a situation where they may return to what brought them to the jail in the first place. We want to stop that. We want to intervene, and we want to do better. And so that's what I'm voting to invest in.
So you were recently the only brave member of the Metro Board who voted not to extend contracts with law enforcement agencies in favor of alternative approaches like security ambassadors and social service providers. So why did you take that vote, and why do you think you were the only one to do so?
So at Metro, we are embracing a layered approach to public safety. And, we launched a pilot program of security ambassadors that I would like to see expanded system-wide. We have invested also in transit security officers, and we do currently contract for law enforcement services. And I voted against extending those contracts twice for a couple of reasons. First, I don't think the narrative that people hear often about Metro right now is that their experience is one full of safety and comfortability. And I don't think that we're going to get there by continuing to do the same thing that we've been doing over this last contract cycle. That's just common sense. This has nothing to do with politics. So I wanted us as a board to have a conversation about what are we going to do meaningfully different that people will experience on the Metro system in order to restore confidence that people will have a safe and comfortable experience, but also restore the experience that people have on Metro. Now, I will say that I've been riding Metro myself to try and experience firsthand what people are seeing throughout the system. I've had some colorful exchanges, but I've had some perfectly bland and normal and boring experiences. Like just you get on a train, you go where you need to go, you get off, it's fine. So I will say, I don't know that system-wide, all of the challenges that people sort of are painting out there are everyone's daily experience, but there are actually challenges out there that we need to address. And so I don't want to gaslight anyone by saying like, it's all fine. It's not. We have to do better, but we also have to invest in the services and resources that people need. And my biggest issue is that we don't have enough personnel interspersed throughout the system, whether it's on buses or on trains. So when I was on the train, for example, and I saw someone who was using drugs, there was nobody I could turn to help this person get help, to assist them to getting to a safer place. There was no help to be asked for. There was no one available. I don't think that's right, especially right now when we're sort of in this time of emergency. Let's at least step up our presence on our buses, on our trains for the next period of maybe 6 months, and see who we can deploy out there, whether it's homeless service providers, addiction recovery folks, provide those services, make sure that they are visible, present, and engaged. And so that's what I would like to see throughout the system. And I do think that law enforcement has to respond to calls because there are cases where they are the only ones with the authority to intervene. So we have to there is a role for law enforcement to play. But right now we also have seen that the Inspector General of Metro in her own independent analysis found that the majority of calls over the last contracting cycle, the majority of calls that have a response from law enforcement is actually responding from the local stations wherever the incident is occurring and not from the contracted law enforcement services. So we're paying for services that we then aren't actually realizing out in the community. And sometimes those law enforcement services for which we contract are responding to other issues, but Metro is paying for it. So I think when we are contracting to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, we should know what we're getting. We should be confident that what we're getting is the right kind of solution and that it's actually delivering the results that we're expecting. And right now, I don't think any of those things are true, which is why I wanted to force the conversation. And the second time, I just asked that we set aside the conversation around the law enforcement budget so we could talk. And I'm even willing to have law enforcement come in and make their case as to what they want to do differently. I'm not trying to shut anyone out of the conversation, but to not have the conversation at all at the board when everyone is really expressing concern about what we're doing on Metro, I don't think sends the right signal. And so I'm trying to have that conversation. I have spoken with Mayor Bass, who is now the new chair of the Board of Metro, and this issue is a top priority for her. As a board, we have taken a look at standing up our own public safety and community safety department within Metro. And so we're taking a look at what that might look like, what the associated costs might be. And I expect that this will be something she focuses on among other issues while she is chair with us on the board.
Hi, Lindsey, Mike Soloff. Good to see you again.
see you too.
Tonight, I'm here in my capacity as the Vice President of Membership for the San
Okay.
Antonio Democratic Club. And since you like easy topics, we're now going to switch to housing and homelessness.
Excellent.
I'm going to ask the first question, but some other folks can ask some other ones.
Okay.
So HUD estimates that there are 900,000 households, not people, households in our county, LA County, that are both low income and a rent burden, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income for rent. And that includes 500,000 households. These are people who are housed, but they're low income and they're paying more than 50% of their limited income for that in housing. That's morally intolerable. And it's also driving the continuing increase in homelessness, no matter what we're doing to try and get people off the streets. So what's one thing that you think that the county is doing well in this area that we should be doing more of? And what's one thing that you think we need to change or to do differently to try and address this problem for people who are barely housed, but are suffering this tremendous rent burden?
Okay. I'm going to go in reverse order. I think one thing that we are not doing well is structuring these services in a way that people know how to access them. I know when I met with the city manager and the mayor, your city manager expressed to me, if he called LASA, he wouldn't even know what to ask them for. And that he didn't have an ongoing relationship with the folks at LASA, which is the LA Homeless Services Authority. So if a city manager in a city like Santa Monica is unclear about what sort of benefit a sustained and engaged relationship with LASA would provide to your community, we're in a world of hurt. And so I think we might need to do a much better job of not only standing up the services in a more intelligent way, but actually communicating with people what services exist and how they can access them. Whether you're an elected official, a regular member of the public, somebody trying to help your neighbor that you see on the street, we need to do a much better job of that. And that's why I'm at the table on LASA, working on this issue, working very closely with the mayor of Los Angeles on regional solutions. And there's a lot more work to do there. Trust me, I will be back on this topic. But a couple of things that I think we're doing well, we are actually funding services. With your support, with your help, Measure H was passed and is providing a substantial amount of funding to services and support on this issue. Now, I will say, while I was campaigning, I received a lot of questions from people about what is actually being done with our tax dollars. And in fact, having the highest number ever released in terms of the point in time count this year in the city of Los Angeles, clearly there's more work to do. There's no doubt about it. But if we didn't have the resources that we have from Measure H, and if we weren't investing already in these problems, it's hard to fathom, but it would be exponentially worse. I can tell you in the last handful of years, LASA has helped to house over 100,000 people, getting them off the streets and into shelter, into services, into permanent supportive housing, over 100,000 people. But the problem is the second thing that I actually think we're doing well is that, and I'll explain what I mean. Homelessness prevention, helping to keep people in housing that they're already in, that is safe, that they might otherwise be able to afford, but for maybe one mortgage or one rent check. These are things that we can do in investing in homelessness prevention and protecting especially renters. And I think the county has stepped up not only in providing its own rent stabilization ordinance for the unincorporated area. We just enhanced those protections at our last meeting, but we've also invested, authorized investing in right to counsel. And I know that Supervisor Mitchell and Supervisor Solis authored that motion very recently, which I was proud to support. Because we need to make sure that people not only know their rights, but have someone who can represent their rights when they're at that very critical moment in time. And I shared at the board meeting a very personal experience that I had as a renter. I know if people are trying to mess with me when I'm an elected official in a community with a very strong rent stabilization ordinance and renter protections, I know they're messing with people who have far less protection, far less resource than me. And so we have to make sure that we are investing in and actually authorizing protection for our renters. As a renter myself, this is something that I live every day. And I think bringing that experience to the board has been critically important in this conversation. There is a program called Stay Housed LA, which is both for the city and the county. So we have authorized continued investment in Stay Housed LA, which provides a lot of resources to people currently. And we need to make sure that we are investing long-term in this resource to ensure that people who need that help and support are actually getting it. But you can go to stayhousedla.org if you haven't already, and check out all of the resources that do exist to help protect renters.
Hi. Hello, Supervisor Horvath. Very nice to meet you. So I'm Isabel Story, the Vice President of Legislation for the club. So I think you may have answered my question already. I will just ask if maybe there's anything that you want to ask, because it's about renters.
Okay.
So as the only renter on the Board of Supervisors, what's your take on how LA County is doing to protect renters? And not only making rent affordable, but making it possible for more renters to possibly buy a home, something now out of reach for many more LA County residents than in the past.
Okay, well, I'll start with a funny story. It kind of made me mad, I will say. When I first got elected, I was asked to do an interview on Larry Mantle's talk show. I love Larry Mantle. We listen to him. He covers so many fun topics. But while we were talking, he said, well, now that you're a county supervisor, you'll have a salary that maybe allows you to buy a place and afford a different kind of place. At which, I was a little bit upset about that, because I had a great job. I owned my own company. How was I able to own and operate my own company in Southern California, in Los Angeles, and still struggle to pay rent? It is unaffordable, and it's a real concern. And so, it's not just the cost of housing, though my question goes right to, if you're paying an exorbitant percentage, just because you can pay your rent doesn't mean you can afford your life. And so it's a real struggle out there. So I will say that perspective as a renter is something that informs not only the protections that we need to help make sure that renters are safe in the housing that they're currently in, but I do ask about what opportunities exist. And I know that the state, and maybe I see our wonderful assembly member is here, maybe he'll be able to talk about the wonderful investments the state is making in new home ownership. I think that partnership is incredibly important to make sure that we are using every opportunity we have at our disposal to get new ways to invest in new home ownership. And so whether there are federal programs for veterans, which I'm sure many of us know about, but sometimes there are obstacles to implementation. So there are often great policies that get passed with the best of intentions, but if we don't have the help on the ground to implement them, they don't actually realize the results that are intended. So I know that the state has been taking a strong look at that, and I'm having conversations with people who are very interested in seeing what kind of pilot programs we can stand up in LA County to help people come into home ownership. It is not easy, but it must be done if we're going to stem the tide of people slipping into homelessness. You're back from
I'm
one.
back for a new topic. Okay. So under current law, citizens have the right of initiative guaranteed in the Constitution, and they can raise taxes for specific purposes, such as the things you were talking about, keeping renters in their homes, right to counsel, et cetera,
Yes.
by an initiative, and they only need a majority vote of the people to do this.
Mhm.
And the citizens in LA City and Santa Monica just use that power with the endorsement of the Los Angeles County Democratic Party, with the endorsement of this club, and with the endorsement of our co-sponsors, the West Side Young Democrats, to pass Measure ULA in Los Angeles and to pass Measure GS here in Santa Monica, which together could raise as much as $1 billion a year for affordable housing and related programs. But right now, the Howard Jarvis Taxpayer Association, the California Business Roundtable, and an association of commercial real estate developers have successfully gotten the signatures to put on the statewide ballot a proposition that will be there in November of 2024, that not only will change it so that all tax measures, whether it's by citizens initiative, whether a local body puts it on, and it's for a general tax, everything has to be by a 2/3 vote. But not only do they want to do that, they're going to make it retroactive so that it wipes out, in their mind at least. We'll see what the courts say if it happens, but in their mind at least would wipe out Measure GS, would wipe out Measure ULA, and anything else that was passed in November of 2022. So my question is, first, do you oppose that effort to limit the power of the citizens to pass taxes by majority vote? And if you do, what concrete steps will you take to help us assure that we defeat that measure?
Hell yes, I oppose that. And I will be working my tail off in partnership with all of you, I know. And I saw Denny Zane like everywhere on ULA. Thank you, Denny, for your leadership. With everything that you've accomplished, you're still at it, and I'm so inspired by that. You don't give up. And I think that that's really indicative of how relentless the forces that we're up against really are. They're well funded and they are relentless. They want to keep taking away our rights and taking away any possibility we have to protect ourselves. So I will be fighting that initiative and making sure that we protect our right to access the ballot as we often do, to make sure that these issues are properly addressed. But I also know that it's going to take all of us, because they're going to be a well-funded effort. But we've fought them and defeated them before, and I know that we can do it again.
Thank you. So, how is the supervisorial redistricting to have 9 or more seats on the board going? Are you getting support from Democratic clubs, other institutional, backing? What's the latest update with that?
Absolutely. So I was very happy to see, I definitely didn't expect in my first 6 months that I was going to be able to tackle something as big as county governance, but we did it in our first couple of months, and at least we kicked off the conversation. Supervisor Mitchell and I brought forward a motion to tackle this issue. The first go around, we didn't have the votes, but second time was a charm in this case. And it took some conversations with a variety of groups who didn't quite understand what was at stake in the first go around. And then we had people reach out to us and say, I didn't know, I want to help, please bring it back. So we did, and it passed. And so what it's making possible is the county investing and actually hiring the expertise to understand what other forms of government we could be looking at, what sort of representation makes sense for a county of our size with the kinds of needs and responsibilities we have. There is no other county government like this in the country, I can safely tell you. And there's disagreements. In fact, there have been past ballot measures to expand the Board of Supervisors. I think the last time it was proposed, it was to expand it to 7 seats instead of 5. So I want somebody who understands this, who really studies how governments work, the benefits, the downfalls, the costs, and everything in between, to provide us that thorough analysis. Because members of the public who want better representation, stronger representation, more transparency in their government, can't do all of that research and study on their own. And so we are going to invest in actually helping to make sure that that information is readily available to the public. So if and when the opportunity comes for us to take a look at potentially expanding the board, the number of seats on the board, potentially looking at a directly elected county executive. But most importantly, regardless of whether we do make those changes, taking a look at how we do the business of the county, because I can't tell you, there wasn't one part of the district I went to when I was campaigning where people didn't say to me, you know, I don't really know what the county does. Can you explain to me what a supervisor does and what you're responsible for? And so it's clear to me we have a much better job ahead of us to do in terms of educating people about what the county does, what we're responsible for, what you're supposed to count on us for, what we're supposed to provide for you, how to hold us accountable, how we do that work on a regular basis. For most people, it's clear as mud. And the people who most often receive our services or are the targeted recipients of our services are those who are most at risk, the impoverished, the vulnerable. They're often working multiple jobs and can't come to a public meeting during the day. There's so many ways in which our government currently isn't working for the people it's intended to serve. And so my hope is that through this effort, we will not only take a look at some of the hot topic political side of this question, but the nuts and bolts and guts of how we do county governance on a daily basis to make sure that you all know and can hold us accountable to what we're doing on a daily basis and make sure we're actually meeting your stated goals and intentions. So that's what I hope for. As you can hear, I'm ever the optimist, despite what government may deliver our way from time to time. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us to change the county for the better.
As you see, we have a returning cast of
I love it.
characters.
I love it.
So in these days when reproductive rights are under attack across the country,
Yes.
what are you and the Board of Supervisors doing to handle, first of all, the increase in people coming to LA County to get abortion care, and then ensure that everyone, whether they're LA County residents or people from coming out of state, so they can access the care they need safely, without delays, affordably. And I might add, for the people coming from out of state, to make sure they aren't reported back to the states where they came from, where that care may be illegal.
Mm-hmm. So prior to my service on the board, the board declared LA County an abortion safe haven. And so there was a lot that went into the thinking behind that, but the overall intention was that anyone seeking abortion services in LA County, whether they are a resident, a citizen or not, no matter where they come from, that they can access those services, especially in light of all of the horrific changes that are happening in states and at the federal level throughout our country. So what we have done to enhance that, working closely with the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office, is making sure that people who come to Los Angeles County will not seeking those services will not be arrested, will not be prosecuted for doing so. We will make sure that those who are providing those services will not be arrested or prosecuted here in Los Angeles County. We're working to invest more in mifepristone, which is also under attack. The idea that medication, which has been deemed safe by the FDA and is accessible to people, is now being restricted is absurd. It is the definition of rolling back people's rights. It is the opposite intention of why we created our Supreme Court. And so we are working to make sure that mifepristone is available and stockpiled as needed for anyone who may need it, no matter where they come from. We are working closely with our community health providers like Planned Parenthood of Los Angeles to ensure that they have the support that they need from Los Angeles County, that they're able to provide those services safely, and that we're also protecting them while doing so. So sometimes that means coordinating with law enforcement in the respective jurisdictions where they are to ensure that their facilities are safe, that they are not under attack. From time to time, things do happen, and we try to be very careful about what does or doesn't get shared, because we don't want to instigate people attacking our abortion clinics in our district or anywhere in Los Angeles County. But we will engage you in the appropriate kind of activism that will help Planned Parenthood and all service providers be protected and make sure that that reproductive freedom it remains here in Los Angeles County, and we're looking wherever it rears its ugly head. I will tell you, in a city in my district, there is a service provider who's looking to come to Los Angeles County, who does not yet have a service here, who believed they had found a location to offer their services and set up practice in Los Angeles County. And they found that when their leaseholder or their lease provider, when they found out that they performed late-term abortion procedures, they are now in a bit of a conflict, just because that real estate entity doesn't want to have late-term abortions provided in their building. It's awful. And so we are watching closely to see what happens there, to see and understand what role we can play, and how we can be partners. Obviously, that's a private agreement, but anywhere where we can be supportive to service providers who need that kind of support, we're taking a look at everything that we have in our discretion to be able to do so. So even here in Los Angeles County, there are still challenges, but we are remaining vigilant to ensure that every person who wants to seek access to the full range of reproductive health care services, including abortion, that they're able to do so.
Great, thanks, everyone. Welcome Denny, Zane to come up. You want to ask?
I can do it here.
Okay.
So you heard reference to Measure ULA.
Yes.
City of Los Angeles.
Yes.
Measure GS and City of Santa Monica.
Yes.
Big time affordable housing resources.
Yes.
What about the county? What's going to happen to create similar resources countywide so that every part of the county has an opportunity to help provide resources for getting homeless off the street and for building affordable housing?
We benefited from your diaphragm here in the room, but for those who might be watching on the computer, I'll restate. You passed Measure ULA and GS to ensure that there are resources to help build affordable housing in Los Angeles and in Santa Monica. What measures is the county taking to do a similar sort of effort? And actually, we're having that conversation right now. We are taking a look at what, as I know you know, and many of you may know, the county recently stood up a new authority called La Casa, the LA County Affordable Housing Solutions Agency. Thank you. Ooh, there are lots of acronyms played. We made it though. Thank you, Karen. I appreciate it.
Be embarrassing.
And so we are, that agency was recently. Here, a little distracting.
What is Michelle Pritchard's husband's name? I can't remember it.
Broad Lane. If you're on the Zoom, if you
remember the
could
two
find
boys, the sons'
I
names?
appreciate it. Just use my
Ian
train.
and
What about you? It's about me. Just kidding. La Casa, it's a new entity that was created by state law, and so we're really excited about the ability to have. To have this new body whose stated intention and mission is to invest in the cultivation, the building of new housing, especially affordable housing solutions throughout Los Angeles County. And the challenge is it doesn't have a funding stream yet. And so there are lots of organizations actively engaged in the conversation about how will we provide funding for La Casa to be able to do its job. And so we're taking a look at that right now. All kinds of conversations are being had. And if I would be shocked if you don't know that this is going on, but if you don't, I will be happy to bring you into the meetings that we're having on it.
I know it's happening. I'd be happy to join.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Danny. Okay, so the last question for you. At this moment, as you know, there's ongoing strikes the Writers Guild, the Screen Actors Guild, Unite Here, hotel workers, and there's talks of more happening with some elements of the Teamsters, SEIU considering striking as well. Some call it hashtag hot labor summer. So what have you done at the county to support workers and in all these industries and help them reach fair deals?
So we have to stand in solidarity with those who work in our industry that means so much to our communities, our entertainment industry, our hospitality industry. These are people who are making our communities exist. And so we have to ensure that the work that they're doing provides them and their families a good livelihood. That's just how it has to be. So I authored a motion of support for the writers, and I am co-authoring a motion of support for SAG-AFTRA. Which will be on our agenda on Tuesday. I've also authored a motion that is on our agenda on Tuesday in support of the small businesses who are impacted by these strikes, because we know that it's the work. Yes, of course, those union workers who are on strike for very legitimate and important reasons. When they aren't working, a lot of other people's work is at risk too. So a lot of the small businesses that support the entertainment industry are also at risk. And so we have to make sure that we continue to patronize their businesses and help them stay afloat during this time. And so we're looking at potentially some creative solutions there too. But when I read stories like the mysterious tree trimmings that happened to not provide shade to people in order to dissuade them from protesting and having their voices be heard. These kinds of tactics are absolutely awful and immoral. And I'm gonna renew my SAG membership. I don't intend to use it really. I never expected to get it, but I want to be in solidarity with the people who are striking. Because it's really important that we think about the implication of a lot of the issues that they're facing. First of all, the contracts that they have are based on models from the mid-20th century. So logic tells us it's time to take a look at those contracts and revisit what's going on. So once again, for me, this isn't political. This is just kind of common sense. It's time. Any business industry, this is more than overdue for them to take a look at this conversation. But I would also say the implication of some of the technology. For example, I heard that creators want to be able to own an image of someone who may be in the background, reuse that image, even if that person only works one day and gets paid one day. They want to be able to use their image in their editing process throughout the life, not just of that project, but any project they create in the future. That's unacceptable. I can imagine if I'm an actor, maybe I want to be in a project and and have the opportunity to be featured, and I should be paid for how I am featured. But I can also imagine that I wouldn't want to be featured in another project that same filmmaker might be making. And I should have a right to be able to say how my image is used and be paid for it. So I think these are important conversations, not just in the context of the entertainment industry, though that's critical in Los Angeles, and of course for many other reasons and in many other places, but it also has implications for AI more generally. What are we allowing technology to take over in our lives without our consent? And what are we willing to do to fight back and protect our rights? And so there's a lot at stake here that goes far beyond the entertainment industry. So for people who think that's for those people who do that crazy thing in LA, sometimes I hear that from my family in the Midwest. It actually has implications for all of us. And so it's important that we're all engaged on these issues. And I'm glad to get such a question because I am proud to stand with those who are fighting.
Supervisor Horvath, do you support the removal of Donald Trump's name from the Walk of Fame?
Okay, so I think that's the last question we have for you. Is we wanted to make sure we thank Supervisor Horvath for being here. We're really grateful for your leadership at the county, and we're glad to have you representing us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And so now, before you go anywhere, we want to bring up Assembly Member Chavez Zbur to do a quick handoff.
If I can.
Yeah, of course.
So I would just have to say, I love having him in Sacramento. He has been an amazing partner. It's, we have the ability to weigh in as Los Angeles County on motions, and on bills that are going on in Sacramento, that impact us. And I just have to say, your partnership, your engagement with my office, lets everyone know here that we are not allowing the distance between LA and Sacramento to get between getting the job done.
Yeah.
We're very much coordinated, collaborating and having conversations regularly. And it's important that we're all lining up as we face these big issues and make sure that the distance between city, county, and state isn't the reason we're getting the results that people are looking for. So thank you for being so actively engaged. I really appreciate it. And now the hand up.
And I actually want to thank Supervisor Horvath. An amazing partnership. I think most of my district falls within your supervisorial district. I think there's all little pieces that are on the outside. But you know, the Supervisor Horvath's leadership on the Board of Supervisors has really been incredible. I think I'm blessed to have a good relationship with all 5 of the supervisors, but Supervisor Horvath and I think have a special partnership, and we're focused on many of the same things. So I was listening to Supervisor Horvath talk earlier about how we need to focus much more on preventing homelessness. One of the things she didn't mention is that she was responsible for getting the entire Board of Supervisors to sponsor AB 1431, which is the California Housing Security Act, which actually will provide, if we can actually get the funding through and convince the governor and others to fund it, would provide rent subsidies, significant rent subsidies for the most housing insecure people in the state of California. And it would be a game changer. And it was really Supervisor Horvath's leadership on the Board of Supervisors that resulted in the County of Los Angeles signing on as a sponsor of that bill and really elevating it. I think I can say the same thing about almost every bill that I'm working on. Supervisor Horvath has been an incredible partner. She has many staff members who I was very close to in my prior role at Equality California, and a couple that actually worked for me during my campaign. And so it's been a very good partnership, and really excited about the new energy that she's bringing to the Board of Supervisors. It really is incredible. I mean, we have some gifted members of the Board of Supervisors. Supervisor Mitchell and Solis and Han are all really great partners, but also always having a new perspective on, I think, really does result in everyone looking at things in different ways. So thank you for all of your help. Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
So just keep in mind that the Zoom folks are here, so you got your little camera right there.
Okay, great. So thank you all. So John, thank you so much. Michael, it's really great to be here. I feel like Santa Monica Democratic Club is like my home Democratic Club, even though I live in the middle of the district. And just want to thank you for really everything you did to help me get elected, and everything that you have been doing since then to really help provide input and help me get off the ground running as I move into this new role as your member of the Assembly. I've got to say the last 6 months have been a really interesting time. It's everything that I expected and a lot more. We are going through and just completed a transition to new leadership in the Assembly. We have a new Assembly Speaker, Robert Rivas, who is from Hollister, California, someone with an incredibly inspiring background. He's someone who literally grew up in farm worker housing. I mean, sharing a bed with his brother and his mother. His grandfather was part of the original farm worker unionization movement and fought alongside Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Dolores Huerta, who was on the board of Equality California when I was there, brought Rick Rivas, Robert's brother, onto the board, and he was on the board when I originally, the board that hired me as the executive director of Equality California. So I go pretty far back with the Rivases, and I think that it's going to be an incredibly, that the state is in really good hands, good progressive hands, as sort of we move forward in terms of sort of the values that that the new speaker has embodied. I'm really proud that the speaker has appointed me last week as the new Democratic Caucus chair, and very, very excited about that new role. And I think it's going to give me more opportunity to really sort of move ahead the priorities of people here in the 51st district, but also I think really shape the agenda for the entire Democratic caucus in the Assembly. Let me start by giving you a little bit of a sense of my bill priorities and where things are. I want to thank the Santa Monica Democratic Club for supporting a number of my bills, and I know you're thinking about considering supporting some others. Now, I have three general areas of focus. The first is housing and homelessness. And, you know, I'm really optimistic about the new leadership in Mayor Bass and the new leadership complementing, I think, some pretty inspiring leadership at the Board of Supervisors. One of the things that I asked myself as I sort of came into the new role with all this new leadership at the local level, I think, as you all remember when I was running, one of the things that I used to say, and I firmly believe, is that solving our homelessness crisis is something that requires regional strategies and regional leadership. And I think now with the new energy that Mayor Bass is bringing and really the partnership with the Board of Supervisors, we have new opportunities to start addressing the homeless crisis. You know, it was really disappointing a few weeks ago when the new homeless count came out and we saw that we're sort of losing ground. I frankly wasn't all that surprised by it, because if you think about it, you know, this is a period of time where we basically have just where a lot of the rent eviction moratoriums are ending. People are living in rental housing with big amounts of built up rent that they owe, and really very limited amounts of support to sort of help people dig themselves out of these things. And I know many people that I am close to who are living in rent, you know, who lost their jobs, weren't paying their rent, got some amount of assistance, but really have these big nest eggs that now landlords are basically, you know, causing them to sort of pay up, and a lot of them are feeling a lot of stress if they don't have any other circumstances. My focus has been, you know, what can I do as a new legislator to start, you know, having an impact on this issue. You know, addressing this issue isn't something that's one silver bullet. It's doing a lot of things and moving in the right direction. And one of the things that I focused on, just because I needed to focus on something, was really focusing on how we prevent new people from becoming unhoused. If you look at the latest homeless count, 10,000 Californians became unhoused since the last time we counted. So I've actually had 4 bills that actually address sort of slivers of trying to focus on how we prevent homelessness. The first is this California Housing Security Act, which is a series of rent subsidies. It would be up to $2,000 a month for up to 2 years for people that are low-income seniors, people living with disabilities, people that were formerly incarcerated, foster youth, veterans, a group of folks that basically face high risk of housing insecurity. If you think about a program like this, I mean, and if you look at sort of the report that came out with the last homeless count, the main recommendation that came out in that report was focusing more on preventing homelessness. We still have to have the programs in place to have transition housing and social service to get people to intervene when people become unhoused, and providing permanent supportive housing on the other side. But I think at the same time, we need to start preventing homelessness. And if you basically, a program like this, if we were able to prevent those 10,000 people from becoming unhoused, it would cost about $500 million for those 10,000 people. If you actually cost out what it costs to intervene after someone is already unhoused, depending upon the level of supportive services, mental health services, substance use services, plus the cost of housing, the cost would be something in the range of $6 to $10 billion compared to $500 million. So focusing on prevention is something that is not only much more compassionate in my mind, but is also really cost effective as well. So that's my signature bill. It's going to be a really heavy lift to get over the line. I met with the governor on it. I think they like it. Given the budget situation this year where they were actually pulling back, they basically said, we'll work with you on this next year, but there's not going to be funding in this cycle. But we're, now we've got, just about 9 months to really try to elevate this and really build support, hoping that the Mayor Bass will sign on to this as well and try to elevate the importance and build the support to actually getting money in the budget to do this. Second issue on the housing issue is AB 1620. This is a bill that is actually sponsored by the city of Santa Monica and the city of West Hollywood. It is I gotta say, it has taught me really what the politics are like doing anything around Costa-Hawkins. The bill is something in Sacramento. The bill is something that I don't know anyone when you describe it says that doesn't make sense and it's the right thing to do. And it essentially is focusing on a narrow sliver of people, those that actually have physical mobility disabilities that are living in rent stabilized apartments and on the second floor. And as they age, they can't navigate the stairs up and down their apartment. So they are at a point where they either have to leave their apartment and then lose the rent stabilized rent and move to a market rent, which risks their housing security, or they become homebound. And if they don't qualify for services, then it's costing us more to sort of provide those services. So this would basically allow them to move to a first floor unit in a building that doesn't have an elevator and maintain the rent stabilized rent. And so it's a really common sense bill. It's made its way through. It was really, I think, probably my second hardest bill in terms of the amount of time it took. I see Anastasia in the back sort of nodding. She was actually very active in helping me with a lot of the details of this bill, and just want to thank you and recognize you for doing that. But it was, we are now at a point where by focusing on doing some things for sort of the mom and pop apartment owners, we've got the California Apartment Association has pulled off their opposition and is now neutral. And I think that's going to, the realtors are still against it, but the apartment associations are neutral. And I think that's going to be enough that we're going to be able to get this through the legislature. We did get it through the assembly in the first round. And I'm hoping we'll get it through the Senate. We're probably going to have to make a couple more modifications. It'll come back for concurrence. But that, in my view, is another housing security bill. Another bill that I've been working on is one that's focusing on the category of people that face very high housing insecurity, which is our foster youth. I think many of you that focus on this area understand that about 25% of former foster youth become unhoused at some point after they become adults. So it is basically the lack of having the same kind of family support that many children who are not foster kids have. And so what my bill does is it basically expands a program called the Independent Living Program, so that it provides support not only to the age of 21, but to the age of 23. And then it makes modifications to the program so that people do not lose their benefits when certain things happen. The program now is pretty restrictive. So for one example is that if you have, if a former foster youth, when they're 19 or 20, accumulates $5,000 in savings, they basically lose the support of the program. Well, we want these young people to have $5,000 in savings. I mean, that's sort of some of what you do to have housing security, right? To have a little bit of a nest egg to turn back on if you lose your job. So it would eliminate that requirement. And then I've got a couple other bills that sort of do the same thing. Second group of issues is on climate change and environmental protection. I have a number of bills in this area, but the two big ones are AB3, the California Offshore Wind and Jobs Act. If we're going to move off of Diablo Canyon and natural gas power plants, we need offshore wind, and we need offshore wind faster than what will happen if we don't actually intervene and try to require some very careful planning. The biggest obstacle to offshore wind is the fact that we actually need to build new and expanded ports. One wind turbine, and they look similar to the ones you see when you're driving out to Palm Springs, is bigger than what will fit, just the arms of it, that will fit in Dodger or Giant Stadium. They're that big. So in order to have a port that assembles these things, we need deeper ports, we need bigger ports with bigger laydown and assembly area, and we don't have any of them in the state. So one of the bills requires the California Energy Commission to come up with a strategy that takes into account protecting our environment, protecting our sensitive ecosystems, protecting our cultural resources, and making sure that the ports that we choose have adequate laydown space so that we can actually preserve jobs here in the state of California. The second part of the bill is actually about the jobs themselves. Many of you who follow the environmental movement, I think, have probably heard that that there's been friction between folks in the environmental movement and some of the labor unions, really over sort of the impact that families are facing when we're sort of moving to a clean energy economy and things like refinery jobs being at risk. And, you know, from my perspective, it is a fair thing for the labor unions to be concerned about the fact that some of the best paid jobs are ones that are at risk of being lost. My view about offshore wind is that we need to actually find ways of having high wage jobs that people can sort of move to as we move to a clean energy economy. And so the bill would require the CEC to study what the impacts would be of having a 70% and an 85% in-state manufacturing requirement for these wind turbines. It's an environmental justice issue. It could do for California what World War II did in bringing the aerospace industry to the state, and we could have really tens of thousands of high-wage, high-skilled jobs in the state of California for over 20 years. And so that's the second part of my bill. Second bill on this package, and there's some others, is AB 1176. This is going to be another 2-year bill. This is another bill that's patterned after something that Santa Monica has already had leadership on. It requires every local jurisdiction to adopt a climate action electrification plan as part of either their general plan update or as a separate plan that would then be in the group of plans that's analyzed under CEQA when folks come to a local jurisdiction for some kind of discretionary approval. The idea is that we actually really have to think about how we're going to have electric charging stations in all the places that our people need them. We can't get to a point where we're selling only electric cars in 2035 and then not have everyone, including people from low income communities, not be able to charge their cars. So it would require jurisdictions to think about creating electric car charging corridors where you would actually have plugs-ins in your parking meters, would require folks to have strategies for requiring electric charging stations in apartment buildings, commercial parking lots, retail parking lots, and strategies for how to fund those. That is probably going to be this. We turn this into a 2-year bill. There's a lot of opposition to it. Even though Santa Monica did this voluntarily and Oakland has done it voluntarily, many cities think that it's going to impose too many costs. We actually have a lot of cities that are really relatively conservative, and they have a lot of weight in the among the trade associations that represent the cities. So this is going to be a pretty big lift. It did get through the assembly side and got stuck a bit in the Senate, and so we are going to do things like restrict this to maybe the cities over 75,000 as a first phase to reduce the cost for some of the smaller cities. But that's another one of the climate change bills I'm working on. And then last but not least is my civil rights and social justice package. The biggest and probably the most prominent bill in that is AB 5, the Safe and Supportive Schools Act, which requires that every school teacher in grades 7 through 12 and certificated staff in our schools undertake an hour per year of LGBTQ plus cultural competency training, completing over 6 years a 6-hour course that has been prepared by the California Department of Public Instruction. Very proud that the California Federation of Teachers, actually CFT, and California Teachers Association are co-sponsors of that bill together with Equality California. This has been an 8-year effort to try to get this in place. A lot of folks think about this bill as being just sort of an anti-bullying bill. It's that, but it's really a lot more than that. If you think about the LGBTQ community now, and you start looking at measures of health and well-being for the community, everything from school dropout rates, where LGBTQ kids are 4 times more likely to drop out of school, or rates of homelessness. 4 out of 10 homeless youth are members of the LGBTQ community, and LGBTQ adults are overrepresented in the adult population as well. We have higher rates of engagement with the criminal justice system, lower rates of health insurance coverage, higher rates of smoking, higher rates of substance use, higher rates of poverty. Really, every measure the LGBTQ community scores low. And if you're a member of our community who's also a member of a community of color, or you're an immigrant, or you're a person living with HIV, or you're even a woman, you're at the very bottom of all those measures. So what this bill is intended to do is really help teachers understand how to identify these at-risk youth. We sort of know what's happening anecdotally, right? We've got kids who are being bullied in their community or even in the school, or don't have supportive home environments. And we know when that's the case, the person they're most likely to turn to for help is a school teacher. And so these kids are facing these circumstances, and without help, what do? They drop out of school. They often will be turned out of their home. They're living on the streets. They turn to survival sex or something else that helps support them. That results in high engagement with the criminal justice system. And it's really a big cycle. So my view is this bill is actually one of the interventions to really try to achieve full equality for the LGBTQ community by focusing on what happens to kids in our schools. Now, you've probably read, this is probably not the easiest year to have a bill come to us. Chino Valley Hills just adopted a policy, I think about 2 weeks ago, that forces teachers to basically out kids who they suspect of being trans to their parents, and basically disciplines them for that. I mean, we know, frankly, that if you're talking about a socially conservative household and a kid who's afraid to tell their parents, what does having a school policy that requires the teacher to tell the parent, what is that likely to result in? That is not the appropriate response, but that is sort of the backdrop of this. We have protests in Glendale and certain schools up in LAUSD. So, the MAGA right has basically decided to target transgender youth and LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ people in general. It's part of the whole attack on reproductive rights and abortion care, and the attacks on people of the Jewish faith. Anyway, this is one of my bills, but it's in the context of that and a number of other, just a really tough atmosphere up in Sacramento right now. There's a couple other bills that are making their way through the system by some of my colleagues. One that is basically trying to make sure that school districts can't just ban books, but that have LGBTQ content or that have content that's educating people about anti-racism or a whole host of things. And so that's sort of the context that things are working on. I am very optimistic that my bills are going to get through. We're working really hard. We've only lost 2-year bills, and we'll continue working on those next year. And then all the rest of my bills got through the first house of the assembly and are now making their way through the Senate. So that gives you a sense of my bill package. The other thing I'll say before I open it up for questions, how much time have I taken now?
Don't worry about it.
Okay. The other thing I'll say is we've got, my 2 other social justice bills I want to talk about. There's one I'm really, really proud of. So we have an incredible teacher shortage in the state of California. And so one of my bills, which we call the teacher pipeline bill, basically is improving a program that allows school staff like school bus drivers and janitors or school cooks. It pays for their tuition to go to school to get a teaching credential. And then my bill expands the program so that it will cover the program's already in place. It's not utilized very much. And the reason why it's not utilized is that it pays only the tuition, but then the other obstacles to someone like a school cook from becoming a teacher are not dealt with in this program. So the school teacher can, if they can make the time to go to school at night after their job is done, their tuition is paid. But then when it comes time to having to get their teaching credential and teach in the school during the day, they're not required to sort of keep their school job or pay for their compensation. So they actually have to quit their job to do that. So this bill would require that they stay employed, that their salary is paid for during the student teaching. It really removes a lot of the obstacles to this program. So that one is a bill that is sponsored by SEIU and by the California Federation of Teachers, CFT, been carrying that. I also have another bill that SEIU has sponsored that's really focused on helping temporary workers of cities and counties. A lot of cities and counties, some of the way that they balance their budgets in recent years is by basically doing it on the backs of their employees. And so in some jurisdictions, we have as much as 40% of the workforce are now temporary employees doing exactly the same jobs as employees that are permanent and are in collective bargaining units and parts of unions. So my bill would basically not restrict the hiring of temporary employees. We think that it's important that cities and counties have the flexibility to hire temporary employees when necessary. But what it would do is it'd say temporary employees can also, if you have the right to join a collective bargaining unit if there's one that's in existence in that city and town, and therefore bargain for better pay and benefits and not be second-class employees. So that, as you might expect. Also, I'm like the favorite legislator of cities and towns this year with my two bills, but that actually has a lot of opposition from the League of Cities. So those are the things I'm working on. Then the thing I was going to tell you about, we just adopted a new budget. Really proud that the budget, despite the fact we were pulling the budget back, really retained a lot of the things that I know you all supported. Really retained pretty strongly our funding for education, both pre-K through 12, as well as the contributions to community colleges and the university system. Really a priority was funding basic social safety net services, food assistance. A lot was retained in the programs funding housing and homelessness. Money was pulled back from climate, which was a disappointment from me, but I think the plan is to really put a lot of that in a climate bond and try to continue that through that funding mechanism. And then something that I worked on, really spent a lot of time on, was really the extension of the film tax credit, which a lot of people, some people basically characterize as sort of a giveaway to corporate America. It's just the opposite of that. Just to give you some context, California's film tax credit, which is a tax credit that is limited to $330 million a year, was coming up and needed to be extended. We are doing that in the context of the fact that New York has just adopted a tax credit program that is actually more generous than California's, that is $800 million a year. Georgia has adopted a tax credit that's unlimited in size. And even the little state of New Mexico adopted a tax credit about 3 weeks ago that's about $160 billion a year. So it's almost half of California's tax credit. This is something that basically keeps significant jobs, high wage, high skilled jobs here in the state of California. I'm worried that we're at risk of losing one of our signature industries, and this funds, jobs both above and below the line. The tax credit itself, I don't understand why we just don't make it unlimited, except for the fact that it's harder to predict, because the tax credit, for every dollar we spend in the tax credit, we bring back $7 in tax revenues to state and local jurisdictions. It supports our small businesses. It supports people that are union union workers. This was a really big priority for the unions. And so really happy that we got that extended, but I'm hoping we could actually expand that in another cycle. So with that, let me stop and take questions.
Thanks so much. That was such a great overview. It's great to know all the different areas that you've been working in. So I want to back up to something you mentioned earlier, which is, so the last time you were here, we asked you about your decision to back Robert Rivas as speaker. And so now we're, several months later, and the news, as you mentioned, he announced his leadership team, and you're part of the team as the Democratic Caucus chair. So if you could kind of give us, first of all, an overview of like who else is on the leadership team and what the different roles are. And then also specifically, we're a Democratic club here. So you're the Democratic Caucus chair. So what's the relationship there? And specifically, not necessarily as a legislator, but as a political actor and as the Democratic Caucus chair.
So the speaker's leadership team is sort of in transition. One of the things that he agreed to do as part of the transition was to not replace committee chairs when he came into office, which was on June the 30th, in part because of how disruptive that would be in the middle of a legislative session. So what he did do was he made, and the other thing that I'm really proud of him was he also promised that he was not going to punish Rendon people. And really proud that, so what he did was the speaker makes appointments sort of in two general areas, right? There's basically the leadership, which is sort of the leadership of the body, right? And then there's basically the committee chairs and committee membership, which the speaker also makes those appointments. So generally things on the committee chairs and committee appointments, he made very, very few changes, except to the extent that someone who, the two people that were moved to leadership positions, he replaced their committee chairmanships with someone else. What he did do is he basically made his top three leadership picks, because it was important to him, as it would for any leader, that he have his own people that he trusts and are loyal around him. And so the top three positions are a speaker pro tem. That new person is Cecilia Aguilar Curry, a legislator from Northern California who replaced Chris Ward. Isaac Bryan, who's in the adjoining district, is the new majority leader, replaced Eloise Reyes Gomez. And then I'm the new caucus chair, replacing Mike Gibson. And so those are the top three leadership posts. All of those, there are a number of other leadership posts, like, majority whip, so a bunch of whips that report that are on the floor team that report up through one of the three of us. The three of us will be part of his ongoing leadership team, and it will be complemented by probably a couple of the chairs of the major committees. So for example, when John Perez was chair, his leadership team was those three people plus the appropriations and the budget chair. Senator Atkins, the pro tem of the Senate, her current leadership team is those three people plus the assistant majority leader and the budget chair. So he will have 5 or 6 people in a leadership team. We will be meeting with him every week on pretty much every issue of strategy that comes before the assembly. Now, my specific job, because I know you asked, signaled that I might be asked this. So my job is really sort of leading the Democratic caucus. So I chair the Democratic caucus meeting every week. I work with the speaker on an agenda. My role is really to try to help the speaker obtain consensus in the caucus and a strategy for what our agenda as an entire caucus is. Now, we're never going to have 100% unanimity, and some of this is about what strategies are where we have differences in the caucus, but that is I think the speaker saw me as someone who is good at sort of building consensus, and so that's the main role that I actually have as part of that role. It also, I'm responsible for coordinating legislative activities and basically coordinating legislative proposals and ensuring as much as possible party unity. I actually have the role of those three leadership positions. I'm the only one that has a political role outside of the building. So I have a role as the liaison with party leaders. I assist the speaker on his political program and assist the speaker-elect Democrats in these target races. So that's a part of my job that, for example, the pro tem and the majority leader don't have as part of theirs. And then advocacy and communications, I actually have, because of the sort of the job of creating consensus in the party, the Democratic Communications Office in the Assembly indirectly reports through me on communications for the Assembly. So that's, for me, it's an incredibly exciting role. A lot of that will, I think, evolve over the course of the next number of months as the speaker builds out his team. So for example, we still have Rendon folks in the budget and the appropriations chair positions. And so I think that will stay. Assemblymember Holden and Assemblymember Ting are incredibly strong committee chairs. The current speaker respects them, and so but I think he will replace people with him at the end of that cycle. So that's that.
See you, Rick. Mike Soloff tonight in my capacity as membership vice president of the Santa Monica Democratic Club. Before we return to legislation, we did want to put this question to you, which I think you heard when we put it to Lindsey Horvath as well. So I'll try and say it shorter if I can. But right now, citizens have the right through a majority vote to raise taxes for specific purposes. It was just done to raise money for housing and homelessness prevention through Measure ULA, through Measure GS here in Santa Monica, with the support of the LA County Democratic Party, this club, the West Side Young Democrats who are co-sponsoring tonight. But we have the California Business Roundtable, we have the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, and an entity that's an association of commercial real estate developers who have qualified to the statewide ballot in November 2024, an initiative that will make it so all tax measures are in any way by local governments, by citizens initiative, general taxes, special taxes, doesn't matter. Everything has to be by a 2/3 vote. So, and on top of that, they want to make it retroactive to try and negate what we just did here in LA County. So my question to you is, do you oppose that measure? And if so, what will you do in all these many roles you have to help us defeat that?
So the answer to that is that I oppose it. And that's not a hard thing to do. I think, just taking a step back, as we look at sort of what the state is going to need, we are moving into a period of time where we've got to rethink government and rethink how we fund government. And I think probably in really significant ways. If you think about like what's happening with automation and chat GPT, those are technological advances that could, if you think about it, really change the lives of every Californian, give us much more leisure time, make sure that our work is something that is something that a human being has to do, and results in us. It could really raise our standard of living and really give us, the time to spend with our families that everyone wants. It also could result in everything being owned by a few billionaires and very, very high rates of poverty. And so, we actually are going to have to think about different ways of funding our government. I've never thought that these attempts by the Republicans, let's just put it out as Republicans and the business community, that to make it hard to increase taxes are ones that are a good idea. And I think we all know that they're actually trying to upend things that happened recently. And if that's the case, they should they should focus on those things specifically and make their case on the specific things, not try to do these roundabout measures that that are, you know, aimed at something else. But it's, you know, the underlying issue is not a good idea. Yes.
Right, Eric. Okay, anyway, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
And so I'm asking questions as the legislative VP of the club. You made my job a lot easier because you talked about all your bills, so now I can sit down. No. First of all, I want to congratulate you on this package of bills, very strong package on your first term in office and how far they're getting in important areas that you decided to target. So as you know, we have endorsed 3 of your bills. So we're going to vote on 2 more tonight. And so the first question is about just how the bills that we've endorsed are doing. You have talked about AB 5 already, safe and supportive schools. I want to let you know that Lynn Servini and I were actually watched the hearing because and also so people at home and here know you can watch any of these hearings in Sacramento during the pandemic. They started this and you could watch live stream. And some of the hearings allow public testimony, very short, but you can say, you know, who you are and that you support bills. So Lynn and I, it was a very moving hearing, and your bill and the witnesses that you had was very powerful about what's going on with the LGBTQ youth in the schools and how the teachers need training. So we were happy to be able to support that one. And but you can, why don't you tell us about AB 1335, because we've endorsed that one. And you also are the principal co-author on ACA 5, marriage equality. I think that's a very important one as well that we're supporting.
Yes. So first of all, in AB 1335, this is a bill that is, I'm surprised that I'll see how many of you fall asleep during the couple minutes that I talk about it. It's one of those really wonky bills. And it was brought to us by Abundant Housing Los Angeles, really trying to reform 2 programs that are already in place that are trying to address our housing crisis. One program called the RENA process, which is the process of setting housing targets for local jurisdictions, and then the Sustainable Community Strategies Program, which is a separate program that basically requires local jurisdictions to put in place strategies to create housing that's sort of basically near transit and create strategies to do that. Those 2 programs, they use different methodologies to create their targets. And the result of that is that the targets for Santa Monica and for West Hollywood and for the city of Los Angeles under the 2 programs, which are aimed at doing the same thing, have different goals. And some of that, and generally what that means is that the goals for the housing that is in the SCS program are generally lower than housing under the RENA program, which means that the housing projections are that difference is actually going into areas that are not near transit. So it's housing that is basically incentivizing sprawl housing as opposed to transit oriented housing. So this bill really just creates a requirement and a set of procedures to make those 2, the goals under both of those programs, the same. We worked very hard with the California Building Industry Association. They're supportive of the bill. That was, and you might, you know, that was a big give because they also build housing in Orange County in a lot of areas that, you know, that the housing is sprawl related housing. Our main opponent is SCAG and the Council of Governments. They have not given us, they've sort of refused to give us amendments. They basically just say that they don't need the program, that they could do this administratively. We basically said, well, if you could do it administratively, why haven't you? This basically ended up delaying housing elements for a number of jurisdictions by up to 6 to 9 months in the last cycle. So I think we're going to go ahead and get this through, but it's, there's always a little bit of an issue when you've got like a government agency essentially saying that they don't need it and they oppose the bill and they're not willing to work with you. But it's, the bottom line on this bill is if you want more housing and you want more housing near transit, you should support the bill. When housing is in an SCS area, it basically means that they're subject to things like permit streamlining, so to funding subsidies, a bunch of things that are identified in sustainable community strategies programs that they're not available if the funding in a jurisdiction is outside of that. I don't think it really affects Santa Monica very much because most of Santa Monica is in an SCS area, but it does have a big impact in other areas of the state. ACA 5, so I've talked about AB 5, which is Safe and Supportive Schools Act. ACA 5 is the measure that will put on the ballot taking Prop 8 out of our Constitution. Prop 8, even though we have marriage equality here in California, it was because the Supreme Court basically gave us a constitutional right to marriage equality. With what we're seeing happening in the Supreme Court with this radical conservative court, 5 years ago when I was at Equality California, people started asking, do you think we need to sort of take steps to reform the California Constitution? And those of us who are in leadership positions in the LGBTQ plus community basically said no, because there wasn't really a risk, and basically putting something on the ballot is expensive, and we didn't want to divert resources away from other things that were more important in our community. We would, putting something on the California ballot is going to cost us, even a modest program is going to be $10 million that we'd have to raise that could be better used for something else. But now we think that the risk is high enough that, we just saw the Supreme Court case last week that sort of essentially, overturned the master piece cake bill, and so we know this conservative court that marriage equality is at risk, and so if the Supreme Court overturned the marriage cases, what would happen is we'd automatically have marriage equality banned in California because it's in the California Constitution. So this is a measure that will put it on the California ballot. We've done, not we, but Equality California has done polling together with the LGBTQ caucus. At this point, it shows overwhelmingly strong support, like over 70%, which is sort of unheard of. So I'm not worried about it, but it is an important step that we need to take given what's happening in Washington with the Supreme Court.
Thank you. So another bill, SB 423 from Senator Scott Wiener, was endorsed by our club as well, although we took no position on the adequacy of the labor provisions. And we also expressed our view that additional funding for affordable housing is needed. So you voted in favor of the bill in committee, but I know that there were reported to be a lot of extensive conversations between you and Senator Wiener to amend it. So can you share anything? I mean, I'm sure a lot of it is behind closed doors, but what kind of negotiations happened there? What amendments or changes ultimately came out of that process that ultimately led to you supporting the bill?
So I spent on probably the week before that vote, I was probably spending at least half of my time talking to Senator Wiener and housing advocates and members of the environmental community, both the coastal advocates as well as the hillside folks. And this was, and the labor unions. So first thing is, I made the small mistake of admitting to someone who passed along to someone else that I had concerns about the fact that the coastal zone was now going to be exempt. So basically what this bill was about was there was a bill that basically streamlined housing called SB 35 that is expiring now. And this bill was extending the sunset. And it was doing some things that were a little bit different. It basically was making some changes to the labor standards under the prior bill, essentially to make it less costly for smaller housing developments to comply with the bill. So it would do more to accelerate housing. And then the other piece of it was that they were now taking away a prior exemption for the coastal zone, and that was going away. The coastal environmental advocates were very, very, very worried about it, as well as the staff of the Coastal Commission. And of course, they approached me as well as a couple other members of the commission. And when I looked at the bill, I knew right away that we couldn't pass it with just taking the exemption away. And I think I never ever, even though I think a lot of the coastal advocates, when they heard that I was nervous about the Coastal Act exemption going away, they assumed that that might be a reason for me to vote against it. I always supported the bill. But, you know, you can support the bill. You could be both for streamlining affordable and housing in the state of California. And you could also be an environmentalist and care about making sure that our coastal zone is protected. So what happened with the most of the negotiations with Senator Wiener were about very specific things. When we decided that we weren't going to exempt the coastal zone, I basically decided, well, if we're not going to, you know, the coastal zone would have made it easy to protect all the coastal resources, but it also would have meant that the coastal zone didn't get the benefit of the housing, of all these housing incentives that were part of the bill. So the only way of, you know, reconciling those two things is sort of rolling up your sleeves and saying, okay, what in the coastal zone really needs protection? And so we negotiated with Senator Wiener a number of very specific protections in the coastal zone. One that exempted sort of that really narrow strip right along the water. The reason why that was important was because not having discretionary approval on the water means that you can't really protect public access to the beaches. You know, the way that happens is basically by having discretionary reviews that look at, okay, if I'm going to build a house and I'm going to put a wall up, that you actually have public access points to the water. I mean, you all have read about all of these things in Malibu for years. I mean, that's protecting public access means we actually have to have a mechanism to do that. It also, what we added was also exclusions for areas that actually had wetlands or that were riparian corridors or areas that had sensitive habitat. We excluded areas that were within certain distances from eroding coastal bluffs. And then we excluded areas from development that were subject to sea level rise inundation. So, you know, none of us want housing in those places, and including, I think, the most ardent housing advocates. So that's when we got those things in place. Then, of course, I was prepared to support the bill and did. The other issue that was out there that is a placeholder that we haven't resolved yet is really protecting our hillside areas. The bill that Senator Wiener originally drafted on its face looks like it has an exemption or an exclusion of high and very high severity fire risk zones. When you actually look at the language, it isn't really an exclusion because it says these zones are excluded, but then it says unless the building complies with mitigation measures required under the building codes for high risk severity zones. So basically means that if you are complying with the building codes, you can build anywhere in a high risk severity zone, right? So that was something that, I told Senator Wiener, that doesn't even pass the smell test. There's a reason why folks that are living in Mandeville Canyon and Topanga are opposing this bill. It needs to change. And so he's agreed to sort of bring representatives of the Hillside Federation together with CAL FIRE and others, and we're going to craft a different provision. So we've got a placeholder language in the short term. And, when you look at that, say, okay, well, if we're complying with these building codes, isn't that enough? Well, it actually isn't, because, think about it. We're basically moving from a situation where you would actually have a discretionary approval from a local jurisdiction. And what they might be looking at is, what is a 35 unit apartment building up in Topanga Canyon? What is that going to do to your access in and out? If you actually clog up your only access route and you actually get people trapped up in these canyon areas during a paradise-like fire, I mean, it's not even just about the 35 units, it's about everyone else who already lives there. So those were the issues. I was proud to support the bill. I was really thankful to Senator Weiner for his engagement in negotiating it. And I think it's a good bill. I think it does protect the environment as well as accelerate housing creation in throughout California and in the coastal zone. And dedicated to try to get this the hillside area protected. Hey.
Okay, so this is where you really saved me a lot of verbiage, because as you mentioned, after Rick's talk, we're gonna vote on 5 bills, whether to endorse, and 2 of them are Rick's bills, and you kindly already told us about them. AB 1176, which requires the local entities to have electrification plans for the future. And 1620, which is the Costa-Hawkins reform for the disabled tenants. So before we vote on those, anything more you want to say about them, or to summarize, tell people why you think these are important and why they should vote for it?
So if you think about first 1176, which is the bill that is focused on planning to meet our climate change goals, I'll tell you the opposition that is coming up from this tends to be focused on, a lot of it is coming from Orange County, frankly, and some of the rural areas, who basically people say, well, my people don't drive electric vehicles, so why am I going to impose these requirements on cities and counties? And I think they think that the electric car mandate is going to go away. I don't think it can. Obviously, what we need to be doing is investing in transit, making sure that transit is sort of the first option where that is there. And if people are not recognizing that not everyone will use transit, that the single occupancy vehicle is part of at least life in Southern California, that we actually have the cleanest vehicles there and that we build the infrastructure out. So I think I talked a little bit about some of what the bill requires. It requires both incentives, but it really requires cities to do what Santa Monica has already done. I mean, I would recommend that you pull down the Santa Monica plan. It's really, really impressive. I mean, they've looked at areas in the city where we should have electric charging corridors. They've adopted policies. And what it does is it's moving things ahead without actually requiring government money to fund it. Part of the plans are putting in place strategies that the cities will use to try to get funding. But part of it is actually doing what cities should do, which is turning to project applicants and developers when they're doing something and forcing them to actually put these things, think about what they need in when an apartment is built, right? I mean, if you don't have a policy that's part of a climate action plan or a climate electrification plan, you don't have anything that automatically triggers a developer to say, am I in compliance with this? It basically has some standard that you actually have to have electric chargers within a new apartment building or an affordable apartment building, or if it's something that doesn't have parking that you've got to actually pay for charging on the street, then it's not going to happen. And this actually moves some of that funding for these things to project developers. And then the other one was 1620. Is that? Yeah, I think I've talked to 1620. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So I won't say any more on that.
Okay.
Thanks. So before we get to voting on 1176, I have a couple of follow-up questions I wanted to ask about it. And I want you to understand where this is coming from, because we all support the decarbonization effort, and wearing a different hat just supported the city's application to the federal government for some demonstration project money. But this is what I'm concerned about. The bill says that local localities are supposed to come up with policies or implementation measures that address the needs of disadvantaged communities, low-income households, and small businesses for equitable and prioritized investments in zero-emission technologies that directly benefit these groups. Now, we made a reference to the RENA process, and the RENA process, quite frankly, in the state of California, year after year, comes up with all these big numbers for affordable housing we have to create, and it never gets created, right? Because the money isn't there. The state back in 2009 spent more money than it did until last year. They took it all away during the Great Recession.
Yeah.
And so my question is this going to be another empty promise to low income people, or, you know, how much money is it really going to take to make that part of it real? Where do you think it's going to come from, and how much do we have in place, and how much do we have to fight for to make it into a real thing for low income and disadvantaged communities?
So I think, so first of all, I think this does what it can in the context of this bill. And what I see this bill doing, you know, and I'm bringing it in a year where we have very limited budgets, right? It was sort of, what can we do in a year where there's not a lot of money to fund things? And that is make sure that when local jurisdictions are making decisions on developments in their areas, that they're at the very least, they're requiring those project sponsors to think about the needs and of all of their citizens, but disadvantaged folks in particular, and they're developing policies. So, for example, if you're building, market rate housing or affordable housing, that there's enough charging stations for those folks, and thinking about nexus requirements. What can you do beyond that to sort of provide for the general public? Given the nexus requirements that are out there. So that's what that does. I think the part of your question that I think is, really astute is, I don't think this is anywhere near what we need to be doing is enough. I mean, we need to recognize, and it goes, I think, to sort of what I was saying about the prior question about tax revenues. The governor, one of the things I was disappointed about was the governor didn't support Prop 30 last cycle, and that was something that I think was really important in providing funding for climate change. And we lost that opportunity, and we're going to have to find other opportunities to fund these things. But the reality is, if we look at building decarbonization, I try not to use that word so much. Moving to electric appliances in our homes. The reality is that's not going to happen to the extent we need it unless there's public funding, because a quarter of Californians live at or very near the poverty line. They are not going to change out a natural gas stove or water heater unless there's public funding. And it's going to be very hard for us even to require apartment owners to do that unless there's funding. And so we need a lot of funding to sort of do all of this. And so, I've been advocating the climate bond isn't really set yet. I'm a little bit disappointed where it is now, because a lot of what's in that bond is sort of the very typical environmental conservation spending that you would expect, which is all good from a climate perspective, but it's not getting to the core of what we need to do to address climate in the state. So I think the answer to your question is, you're right that this isn't sort of it's not the silver bullet, it's not the answer alone, but it is something that I think is important. And if our cities and towns aren't planning for this stuff, it's just not going to happen. So we need that thought leadership to happen, and it's worth the cost, I think, of doing that now.
Posted if Santa Monica gets a demonstration project, because that's exactly what it's supposed to deal with, is how we can make this happen for low income people. One other question about 1176. So as you probably saw, most recently reported in the LA Times on Monday, there's a mass eviction going on right now, over 500 rent controlled tenants, units in Barrington Plaza, which I believe is in your district.
Yeah.
And the landlord's apparently asserting the right to use the Ellis Act to evict all those tenants in order to perform retrofitting on the building, in this case, fire sprinkler stuff. That whether what he's doing is legal or not is being challenged by the tenants. There's actually going to be a court hearing tomorrow. But my question is this, what have you done so far in this bill, or what will you do, whether in this bill or otherwise, to assure renters that unscrupulous landlords, which is fortunately a minority of them, but there are some out there, will not be able to use the change out in the existing buildings that we're talking about in 1176 as a way, and then combine that with the Ellis Act to try and say, no, now I can evict all of these, particularly rent control tenants, because there's a financial incentive for the landlords to do that.
Interestingly enough, and I sort of hate saying this because I think we'll probably get some calls. We haven't gotten calls from any of the tenants that are being evicted yet, so I hadn't really focused on this very much until we got the question today. But looking at the Ellis Act, I don't think that the Ellis Act gives them the right to do this. We did take a look at, but I also don't know that the Ellis Act, that we actually need changes to the Ellis Act to sort of protect these tenants. I mean, if you look at the LA city requirements, there are requirements that are applicable to this kind of situation. And I think the city, I'll tell you that I think the city is probably a more favorable forum to try to increase protections for this kind of thing. But we looked over at this afternoon, we looked at the relocation assistance from the city of Los Angeles. And I don't think that what they're doing is allowed. I did put a call into the city attorney today, Heidi Felstein Soto, and I will engage with her. And I think, spend some time looking at this and seeing if there's some ways that we can help. So,
Do you think there could be some language of 1176 saying the local governments ought to consider this and make sure it doesn't happen?
Oh, I don't think there's any problem. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can do something like that. I mean, I don't think we should. Yeah, I don't think we should be evicting tenants if we don't, if it's not required. But yeah, we'll look at that. Yeah, Denny.
So thus far, the city staff is taking a pretty, we've got nothing we can do sort of stance on this. And it's rather disconcerting. The council directed staff to look at other options for what it might do, supposed to report back into the council recess. But I don't think it's all clear that the local city responses are going to be adequate, or that they legally have created an adequate capability there.
Right.
So you may very well find in your district here in this city, there are 3 buildings that Douglas Emmett owns of comparable scale to Barrington Plaza, much closer to the coast, much bigger profitability opportunities. The Ellis Act is their doorway, the super rich doorway to get much richer.
Yeah, I mean, the Ellis Act is not supposed to be available for evictions if you're not taking the rental unit off the market permanently. I mean, it's not supposed to be used on its face to do a short term. Yeah.
I know what they said it, but the question is whether it doesn't.
Yeah.
That's what we might need help on.
Thank you. We will definitely look into this and be engaged with you on this. So thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Rick. I really appreciate it for you being here.
Assemblymember Zbur, this is Andrew Rudick. You're my assembly member, and I wanted to thank you for your service and your time this evening. I also, if I may, just 924 days have passed since an insurrection against the United States, and Los Angeles is still honoring the coup's leader and part of your district on its sidewalk. Do you support that honorifics removal from public land as 6 candidates for California Congressional District 30 and a number of local and state officials already do?
I saw by the way, I noticed your tweets about this. And so thank you very much. What I'll say tonight is stay tuned.
You heard it. I won't say news because you didn't say it, but
thank you.
We'll keep an eye out for that. Thanks so much. Assembly member Rick Chavez, everybody. So don't go anywhere yet. We still have some business from the legislative committee. So let's bring up the chair of the legislative committee, Isabel Story.
Okay, whoever is here is gonna get to vote. We have the people in the room, and we have quite a few people on Zoom.
Come into the view of the.
Oh, come into the view.
Right here, yeah.
Okay, here I am. So hello, Zoom. The Zoom people are still here, and we have some people in the room, so thank you. So we have 5 bills to vote on. These bills were considered and vetted by the legislative committee and the executive board. Now we're bringing it to a vote of membership. You've already heard about the first 2. AB 1176, that's for the local electrification plans. AB 1620 is the Costa-Hawkins reform for people with disabilities. And the third one is AB 1386 on veterans housing. And we have Dan Hall, who is our Vice President of Political Action on the Zoom, and to tell us about that bill.
All right, can everyone hear me okay?
Let's see, can people in the room hear Dan? Yeah, okay, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Isabel. Okay, so I am here as the advocate for Assembly Bill 1386, which is sponsored by or written by Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel from LA, of course. And this is a homelessness and housing bill for veterans, so near and dear to my heart. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, 10% of all homeless veterans are in LA County in the nation. And I think we have definitely a huge responsibility here in California to help resolve this big issue for the veteran community. And what Assembly Bill 1386 does is it authorizes entities referring veterans to housing units funded by the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program, or other certain housing units supported by project-based housing vouchers, to refer veterans at higher income levels if units are unable to be filled after a certain period of time. I believe it's 28 days at a lower income threshold. So basically what that means in like layman's terms is oftentimes homeless veterans actually receive their income levels are too high for state requirements for housing. And that's because we get federal benefits for their service. And so those benefits put them in an income bracket that is actually still too high for receiving supportive housing. But of course, those benefits are for their service and need to be used oftentimes for medical bills and stuff like that. So what this bill does is it allows veterans, if these projects cannot fill units with low income veterans, so 30% of the area median income, it allows up to 60% of AMI for veterans to fill those units. And so, for example, at the West LA VA campus, they're doing a huge housing project there, but only 11% of those new units have yielded occupancy because of some of these restrictions that are in place around income. So 1386 does change that and allows, if they can't meet that lower income requirement or find veterans at that lower income, it then allows a higher income homeless veteran to take that unit.
Okay, thanks so much, Dan, for that one.
Yeah, thanks.
Homeless veterans. Okay. I'm bringing SB 403 by Senator Wahab. It bans discrimination based on caste. So my first question when this was brought up to me, is this really needed? Well, it looks like it is. There's been a lot more caste-based discrimination in California. It's been happening in businesses, workplaces, housing, schools, and it's particularly in communities with high population of South Asians, such as Silicon Valley. As more South Asians migrate to California, we have 1 million now in our state, and especially in places like Silicon Valley, and their instances have surfaced there. And there was a 2018 study that surveyed South Asian Americans and found that 2 out of 3 workers reported facing caste discrimination in the workplace. So Senator Wahab has come up with this. We already have a number of protected classes in California that are not allowed to be discriminated against: gender, race, so on. And what this will actually do is, under the category of ancestry, it'll spell out that caste is also protected against discrimination. So that is a SB 403. And our last bill on the consent calendar is SB 525. This is about establishing a minimum wage for healthcare workers. And to speak on that, we have Representative SEIU, Jose Barrera, on the Zoom.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing the space for me to speak. And I apologize, I have a cold, so I'm a little bit sniffly, but I'll do my best. SB 525, presented by Senator Maria Elena Durazo out of East LA, is a bill that sets up a $25 minimum wage for healthcare workers, both in private and public hospitals. So this bill essentially applies to just about every healthcare worker that works in a hospital, and I believe also dialysis clinics across the state of California. Since this bill was first introduced, there has been some few amendments to address some concerns regarding hospitals being able to afford that, with one of the biggest amendments being that the bill will set a $21 minimum wage on the first year after it's been introduced, with the following years allowing for the $25. So this way hospitals have time to plan for the 25 and be able to budget appropriately. And this is also comes at a time where a lot of hospitals through our bargaining negotiations have already implemented $21 minimum wages. So this only sets it forward a little bit and sets a precedence for us to be able to do this. And the biggest reasoning for this bill is because throughout the pandemic, our healthcare workers were working endless nights, long shifts, being very short staffed. And right now, prior to the pandemic, there was a report that said that we're in California 500,000 healthcare workers short, which is already a large, scary number. And the short staffing hasn't stopped since. So an incentive for us to be able to attract more talented workers into this workforce, we hope that SB 525, by implementing a $25 minimum wage, will create that incentive to attract more talented workers into this field, so we could be able to provide the best patient care possible.
Okay, thank you very much. So now the moment of truth, right? We're going to do the vote.
Yes.
Okay.
Was the city one that Dan was talking about also on the consent calendar? Or is that?
No, that would be separate.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, these are the bills.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're gonna do it as a consent. Unless, okay, I do want to give an opportunity, if someone wants to pull a bill and discuss it, we could take it off the consent calendar. Otherwise, it's a late hour, we'll vote for all five. So does anyone want to take a bill off the consent calendar to ask a question or discuss? Good.
Great.
I was holding my breath.
Right. All right.
But I want to give people a
Yeah,
chance
of
if they
course.
really want to ask something or, Okay, so we will put it to a vote. So for these five bills, if you're in the room, raise your hand.
We need a motion.
We need a motion. Okay, can you do the motion?
Yeah, of course. So first,
that.
we need a motion. If someone wants to make a motion to support all five bills. I saw Lynn's hand went up first, and Brooke, did you want to second it? Okay, great. So we have the motion in a second now. So to vote in favor of supporting all five bills, raise your hand.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 11.
Yeah, Denny.
Yes, I think
Okay.
11 in the room.
Okay, great. And then there's 7 more on Zoom. So we have 18.
18.
Unless you didn't count.
I saw you. Did you count? No,
I didn't count it.
Okay. Okay, so we're at 19 votes.
Okay,
Everybody on Zoom can lower your hand. And does anybody want to vote no? And do we have any abstentions? Okay, so they pass unanimously. And now we'll go to Dan for the local city ordinance. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thanks, John. Okay, so one minor action, political action that we have going on is similar to SB 525. SEIU UHW is asking a lot of local municipalities to consider a local measure as kind of insurance against if SB 525 gets watered down or doesn't pass altogether. There is a push at the city to potentially do an ordinance around this. And so what I would propose tonight is that we support that movement for a $25 minimum wage for healthcare workers in Santa Monica in anticipation of a local ordinance coming to the council. So we are able to advocate for it on the club's behalf. If anyone in the room or on Zoom wishes to move support, that would be great.
I'll move support that.
Okay, Isabel makes the motion and Tom Peters seconds. Any discussion? Okay, not seeing any, so let's take a vote. All in favor? Okay, we have 9 in the room. We have 7 on Zoom. So that comes out to 16. Everyone can put their hand down.
John, there was 8 on Zoom because Sonia and Bruce actually.
Okay, got it. Okay.
And Bruce both had their hands up.
Okay, so it's one more, Natalia. Anybody want to vote no? And any abstentions? Okay, great. So we have another unanimous vote of support.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, and our last item is going to be from Natalia, another political action item. And while she makes her way over, I'll just make sure we announce that in August, we're going to have our diversity and inclusion potluck picnic, and keep an eye out on the emails for the exact place, date, and time.
Thank you. So for those of you still in the room, apologies to those of you on Zoom. There are some postcard packets back there if they haven't all been taken already. So if you are willing to fill out postcards and send them out by the 27th, I believe, please feel free to grab a packet and note which one you took on the little sheet right there. And I see Isabella's got one right here, so one left. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Natalia. So that concludes our meeting. Thank you, everybody, coming in person, on Zoom, those who have already left, those who are watching on YouTube next week. Appreciate everybody, however you engage with the club. And that is an adjournment.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, John, Mike.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John.
Thank you all. See you later.